Thank you for joining us. Today, we're going to be speaking to a very special author. His name is Griff Ruby, and he has spent decades tracing the Catholic Church, where it's been, where it's going, what's been lost, and why he believes the heart of authentic Catholic tradition is still very much alive. I'm very much looking forward to speaking with you. Griff, thank you for joining us today on EC Talk. Thank you.
You're welcome. So, where do we start? That's
Griff,
me.
we
I'm
have a
Griff Ruby.
lot, I've interviewed a lot of authors, and this is packed with information, and it's hard to know what is the most important. What I want to start off with is what is the main message of your book? If you had just one answer, you wanted people to know, what is the main message?
I would summarize that as what I call kind of a threefold basic conclusion. And point one is probably the most shocking part of it all. And that has to do with the fact that most of those places that people think of when most people think of Catholic and they go to some building and it says Catholic on it. And in many cases, these buildings were built when they were run by Catholics. But what goes on in there really isn't Catholic in the sense of that word.
Okay.
See, things all started changing, and it was like the Rock of Peter became shifting sand. Well, not really the Rock of Peter, but that's something one would have to dig into a lot more to explain
Right.
what is going on. It shocked every serious Catholic all through the 60s and 70s, and it's just like every day, what are they mucking with now? And it was always something. And so the thing is, the real Catholic Church cannot change in its aspect. So, let alone anything more serious, its doctrines and so forth. So, it's different. So different. And I've kind of thought about it like this. We have 70 years ago in the whole world, you could go into any Catholic church in any part of the world and you would identify it immediately. You knew what it was. And even today, after all these years, there's some remaining old timers who are old enough to remember that church. And when they see what I call a traditional Catholic church, they recognize it at once. They walk in there, oh, that's right. I forgot we did that. Oh, at that. And I remember that. It's like
Are you talking
it
about
all
because of
comes
the visuals
part of it. Yeah.
and the traditions that they're going to experience?
Yeah, the
Yeah.
rubric, or just
Yeah.
the silence and holiness and awe when you walk into the room. You walk into what passes for a Catholic church, and people say, "Oh, what are you doing after today?" "Oh, well, I got a party. Oh, yeah, my son's in Little League tomorrow. Whatever. And you walk in here, and it's they might
It's
be saying a
reverent.
rosary, and we could get
Right.
involved with that, or a
Right.
litany or something, or otherwise, the most you'd say might be just, excuse me, or mind if I sit here? You know,
Yeah.
just don't talk
Yeah.
because we're there to be, it's just us and God, not us and howdy, neighbor. I mean,
Right. Right. Right.
there's plenty of room to be neighborly before, after, and the rest of our lives, which we should
Okay.
do, of course.
Right. Right.
But this is a time specific for God. So there's a whole atmosphere different for one thing. But if you were to
Mhm.
see, like I said, somebody who has seen that old church and is old enough to remember, they would recognize any traditional Catholic parish for what it is.
Mhm.
On the contrast, however, what passes for Catholic today in 99 point umpty places that say Catholic on the front, frankly, they have a lot more in common with being an Episcopalian, Methodist, Lutheran, some other church. In fact, so much that it barely makes a difference. And maybe that's why they're so unconcerned about where we go.
Griff,
Because,
where did this change come from? Why did that happen? How did it
well,
happen?
that's the story of the whole story of the saga of Vatican II. Now, I know that we are principally here to talk about, well, it's a two-volume set of
Yes.
my book called Sede Vacante. But before
Beautiful
those,
covers. Yeah.
yeah, but before those, I wrote a different one chronicling the whole events leading up to all this. And that was the resurrection.
On the human
And
Catholic Church. Mhm.
that one started when I first met up with traditional Catholicism myself. It's not in my town. Well, now we have a priest who comes once a month and says it in, I think, what used to be the local Grange or something.
So
You
let,
know,
let's backtrack just a little bit. Are you Catholic? Were you raised
yes,
Catholic?
absolutely, definitively.
Okay.
So. Yeah,
So
categorically.
you've
So
seen
here's
just
what I believe in. I'm
in
not
your
just an
lifetime, you've
outsider.
seen it. Yeah.
I'm not just an outsider
Right.
making a documentation. I really, seriously believe in what I'm advocating here.
Right.
And I am advocating it. I'm not just saying, well, this interesting thing, and what do you think? Well, like I'm National Geographic or something. I mean, this is something that I'm involved in, heartily involved in, and have been since I met up with it in 1992. So,
Griff, why are you so passionate about this?
because I have found out how important all of that is. Why do we have Christianity? Every saint, every martyr, I don't think they'd be what they were if they weren't passionate about Christ. And it all really comes down to Christ. So that gets back to the things. Point one was that what passes for Catholic today really isn't. I mean, you can tell just from the appearance, and you dig in, you actually find a whole lot more. Point two, that which is Catholic does still exist, even as a relatively small group, but we're as worldwide as we ever were. Our numbers are small, but we still exist, and we still have all the true characteristics of the true church. So we've inherited all of that and have to be, the custodians of this vast legacy for our puny shoulders, but such as it is. And point three, our Lord Jesus Christ came along and worked his miracles and preached his sermons and he built a church. A lot of people don't always understand that. He also founded a specific church. He designated who was in charge. That Peter was the only apostle he renamed, because when God changes somebody's name, that's always something important. So Jacob becomes Israel, Sarai becomes Sarah, Abraham becomes Abraham, and countless other changes down through the Bible. It's always that way. None of the other apostles, Simon is no, not Simon. Let me think of somebody else here. Um, Barnabas is still Barnabas.
Mhm.
Um, you know, Luke is still Luke.
Yeah.
So at any rate, Jesus organized one church, and he set it up in a way that it would remain one. And the human condition can sometimes make that kind of difficult to hold together. Sometimes it's like herding cats, but basically the divine power is there, always working to really keep it together. And we do. So those are my three basic points.
Very
Well,
good points.
yeah.
Let me back up just real quick because we are really kind of settling in on the change of the Catholic Church. Is this a positive thing? Are there positives in it? How do you view these
I would
changes?
have to say no. I mean, it's easier for people, I guess you could say that, but you know, but it's kind of like it's like watering it down.
I was just going to say,
It
so
does
you
make
feel
it.
like it's been diluted.
Oh yeah,
Okay.
yeah. We complain about when they water down the drinks at the bar. I suppose I don't go there, but if I
Right.
had, I guess I would feel that way if I wanted a drink and they watered it down. So, but
So
that's
you feel like it
nothing
was more
compared to watering
structured,
down the faith.
more message driven, and now we're
You
making things
know,
a little bit softer. We're uh,
gushy.
smoothing out the hard corners that are important.
Well, making it gushy, kind of
Okay.
undefinable. It goes from being something where you know exactly, or can find out if you don't if you don't know it yourself. You can find out from any of the standard, catechisms and other sources that can tell you, this is what the church teaches about this, that, and the other. Choose a subject, you can pursue it, and there it is. The answer is straightforward, definitive, and if it's any question that hasn't been resolved, they will even tell you that too, which
Right.
you really got to dig a long ways in before you'll even find one of those. So you know where you stand, you know what you're about, and these are the things. Well, in the 1960s and 70s, suddenly everything was changing. And I thought, well, it's going to be in English instead of Latin or whatever vernacular you're working with. And I guess you could say that makes it convenient. And probably of all the convenient things, of itself, that could be the least harmful. Now, I hope I get a chance to mention why there was a problem with doing that. But yes, it is easier to work with a vernacular. My knowledge of Latin is nowhere near what it probably ought to be, but I can work with the English. But that's about it. And in fact, we already had, you want to know what's going on, and you can't follow the priest's, quiet whisperings in Latin, if you hear them even, because you have the missal right there in your hand, and it just shows you, this is what he's doing. And it tells you what he does and when he does. This is the time he goes to this side of the altar, and this is the time he goes over here, and this is the time he, whatever he does.
Mhm.
And so you can follow these rubrics, is what they call it, the motions, the things you do. As the classic saying would be, you say the black and do the red, which is to say what color they printed
Oh,
the
oh,
green
oh, I like that.
are.
I've never heard
And
that
so,
before.
so,
Griff, it
yeah,
sounds to me like you are believing that the changes that have been made, it's been a slippery slope. It started with good intentions, and now we're just kind of going quickly down where it doesn't make sense.
I'd have to say I don't really even believe that there were good intentions behind it.
Oh,
Yeah, because the real goal was to try to have all these pet projects that people were already kind of brewing, all kinds of things. They wanted to compromise with the communists and with the Masons, and they wanted to be kind of ecumenical in a bad sense. I mean, ecumenical is supposed to be the whole church, as like when you talk about an ecumenical council, let's say Trent or Nicaea or any of the several Lateran councils, where the idea was they called it ecumenical because you tried to gather all the bishops of the church and they all gathered in the council and did whatever they needed to do there. So that's why it's so important to me is that I want to be, you know, the whole thing. It brings the religion into sharp focus. It's like the difference between looking at a scene through a very dirty window, maybe
mm,
cloudy, and you can kind of make out some bare outlines, but you can't really be sure, versus totally pristine, clear glass, so clean you can't even
wow.
tell it's there. That's
Griff,
just what to strive for.
what an unbelievable example, because it feels like from what you're saying, you looked out the window when you could see clearly. You know what's out there. Now, over
Uh,
years, it's been fogged up, it's been smudged. And even though you might know what's out there, you're kind of concerned about other people, maybe younger,
not
maybe
knowing.
not knowing.
Yeah. And then what's worse, they won't even be in on the graces of God. The purpose of God is to sanctify mankind.
Yeah.
Salvation may be the highest law, but how are we saved? But being equipped for heaven by our sanctification. Not that we achieve perfection in this life. Maybe some great saints may come fairly close, I guess, or certainly relative to many of the rest of us, I suppose. But the striving is there, and as long as that striving is there, all God needs grant when we finally go to see Him is the fulfillment of that striving.
Mm.
But if we don't care, oh, I'm good enough, I do this and that, and so I'm a good person, there's no striving there. There's no attempting to, grow as a saint and so forth. And unfortunately, that's enough in what passes for Catholic in all these
Mhm.
places. So it's very important to me, and that's why it is that I'm very concerned with that. Well, maybe
Yeah.
we should move on, unless you got more to
I
ask.
do want to give you an opportunity because you said that you hope that you had a chance to speak to the Latin to English, because that does seem to be a somewhat
Okay.
positive. I heard of positive seed planted in there, and I want to give you some time to speak on that.
Okay, okay, this is worth clarifying. Being able to see in your language what's going on, which we just had in our missal, if we wanted to follow on, we could see, okay, the priest is doing, yeah, here it is, he's praying, this is what he's praying, and we can even pray along with him, which is kind of a nice thing to do.
Right.
But he's the one whose prayers really count because he's the priest. But we could feed ourselves by, uniting ourselves with those prayers. So now all of a sudden he's up there saying all this stuff. So you really don't need the book. Well, gee, that's convenient, right? Well, they didn't just translate things from one language to another. They actually changed the meaning and content of the prayers themselves. Whole doctrines have been cut out You
Okay,
don't
that is
hear about
concerning.
the merits of the saints. And an interesting comment, which has been pointed out to me. I haven't had a chance to verify it, but I have to admit my experience seems to be consistent with it. In all the what they call the propers, the different prayers they have for the different days for the various saints and feasts of the church and so forth, and in all of those, the concept of grace and soul, even the words, apparently don't occur. So, I mean, it's just things like that. Instead of prayers to for Saint, Gertrude to intercede for us on this, area of what she was a specialist as a saint in and so forth, gets replaced with "Let's have a nice day," as if there ever was a Saint Gertrude, and it goes on like that. You see this stuff watered down. And then you get to important parts of the Mass. You know what makes a Mass truly a Mass as the church teaches it? The priest takes a piece of bread and a bit of wine, and he says certain words and gestures and things over it. And when he's done, he has actually changed. Transubstantiation is the word, the bread and the wine into the body and blood, and by the way, also soul and divinity of Christ. So
Right.
when he gives you that, it's Christ feeding you, as he said in John chapter 6, where he says, "Unless you eat my flesh and drink my flesh, drink my blood, you have no life in me." Strange words. And some people were shocked. A lot of people walked away at that
Got up and
time.
left. Yeah. Hmm.
Read the chapter. And he did say, "Oh, wait, come in. I didn't mean what it sounded." He could have done that if that was just a misunderstanding, or he got a little overly dramatic. Here, let me tone that down a little. I'm just being symbolic. He didn't do that. He just, if they left, they left. And the apostle said, "Well, we're not going anywhere. We're here, because you're the one who has the words of everlasting life." So that's one of the tough words that some people have facing. Even people who would like to be Christians, they meet up with that, and it's like, oh, I don't know about that. I don't want anybody to think I'm some kind of cannibal. So,
Right. Griff, you are so incredibly passionate about this.
yeah,
When did
that's
this
it.
start and why?
I think I've been passionate for a long time, just about it was a long search. My whole life was like that. I started, I would say, probably in a history class in high school, where I began to wonder about looking for civilization. I wanted to believe that there could be a real sense of law and order. We sometimes call that now a rule of law, where things are carried out in ways that are good and practical and so forth to help people work together properly and as we all should and so forth. And coming from an entirely secular, non-religious upbringing to a variety of different people who had various stages I had to go through on my way from basically nothing to even just a decision to be a Christian. And then from there, a decision to be a Catholic. And then a decision that turned out to have been intercepted because I still went to one of these places that isn't really Catholic. And then as I finally discovered what it was like, this is it. This is what I've been looking for. So that's my life in a very tiny nutshell.
Griff, I'm going to be very blunt with you. I'm going to ask you a question that might be kind of hard and push back a little bit. Do
Oh,
you
okay.
believe what you're speaking about is from your vision and good for you, or what you're seeing, is it harmful for people who are slowly being dragged down this muddy hill? How would you say that?
I would say those who are being dragged down, as you say, they're being dragged down. And someday every one of us is going to meet our maker. And if we didn't really pursue this as much as, he can look in our hearts and he knows what we have and what we've been born with, and he knows what we're looking for. So he's concerned with that.
Hmm.
And if we're not, then it's like, I never knew you. He could say that if we're not concerned with him. Would you like to have Jesus say to you when you go to see him, I
Never
never
knew
knew
you.
you. I don't want to hear that.
It would be much easier for you just to sit quietly back, but your passion and your love of people calls you to speak up and step out, doesn't it?
Well, yeah,
Yeah, I can
as
see
I
that.
mentioned at one place, what I've learned has shown me so much that can help so many so deeply. And I finally was thinking, well, why are you even writing about this? And I
Mm.
realized, you know, it's far too much merely to comprise my own inner edification. It's like I'm seeing people lose their way because they don't know what I know. And it would be criminal of me to keep it to myself.
Mm. You are a deep thinker. You're a deeply looking into yourself. And I'm curious, what did you learn about yourself in this journey of writing the book?
Well, by the time I'm writing, most of my lessons about myself, I mean, all the big ticket items were thankfully already behind me. I've seen the kinds of darkness in my heart. I've seen the kinds of things that oftentimes just right there on my shoulder. All I got to do is just turn the wrong way and reach, and it'll always be right there to come crushing right back in at a moment's notice if I'm not careful. So, I mean, we all have our inner demons. What we do with
Yes, we
them,
do.
how we handle that is, I think, a very big part of what makes us human. So, you know, what we learn by the grace of God is to be able to just not go into those things that are, a problem for
In the
myself
name of
personally
Jesus,
or
get
any of
behind me,
us.
Satan, right? Just, I'm not going to go there.
Bingo, you got it.
Yeah,
Yep, you
yeah,
got it in one
absolutely.
there. Very good. Thank you.
Don't you think that those hard times, that grows our faith? It's not the mountaintop experiences. It's when we're in the valley that we're saying, God, I have messed up. You're all I've got. Great, Griff. I'm all you need.
Yeah, yeah. That's always the great thing right there. Just being able to be grateful for what I've got, but also still striving for yet more.
Yeah.
And that's, all of us have some ways to go. So, but this isn't my journey. And I think that's another point I was hoping to get to is that
Well, let's talk
these
about
books
that.
are not my journey. I don't even factor into any of the story until I start gradually discovering it. And then still, I'm just this guy who starts trying to find stuff out, who's who, what's what. Like this resurrection book I was, talking about, it goes into a lot of details of all the different priests and bishops and even important prominent laity and so forth, and religious, nuns, monks, and so forth, the people who comprise this whole traditional Catholic community. It's their story, and again, also God's story as the story of God's grace working through all these people through all this time, much of which transpired when I didn't even know to be a Catholic yet. So I kind of come along and join it and finally get to the point where I'm writing a book that I wished had existed already. It would have been
Mhm.
nice. What is this? How did this happen? Where is this group coming from?
Mhm.
It'd be nice to have a book that's written that I can read through and takes me by the hand and introduces me to everyone and kind of explains all the things going on and so forth. But that book didn't exist. That's why I
Mhm.
resolved to write it. And then my scientific volumes, which is what we get to here, is where we discuss the deeper theological meanings, where the resurrection book is mostly history, names, dates, places, events, and how they all tie together and why. The books here are like the theological footnotes to it all. What do you base your view of the church on? Well, this drills into that in great detail. That's why it's called dogmatic ecclesiology applied to our times. It's basically allowing the theologians of the church each to speak at length on a variety of topics that are relevant to understanding the present situation. But then there's also the next part of it is that people have come up, Catholics concerned with what they saw. It hurt them every time they came into church and suddenly, oh, today you're not going to receive communion on your tongue, as has always been the case since practically the beginning. You're going to hold out your hands and we're going to put your there, and then you go feed yourself. Now, what happened? I know if you're a Catholic, it's like at that time, it's like, that's ridiculous. Why are they doing that? I shouldn't be handling that with my hands. A priest, I mean,
Wow.
he has particles on his hands that he carefully rinses off and causes to go right back into the cup, you see, before he swallows it all. And so, and very, very strict procedures. I just put the
Wow.
thing in my hand and it's like the reverence just disappears right there in that small change.
Griff, that's what an example. What a perfect example. Almost like you said also, I'm not worthy of taking it, you feel like. Why am
That's
I
right.
handling this?
That's right. That's not my job. And so that's just one more tiny detail of why it matters. But and yet you could say it's a big thing, but so many of these things are big things that compared to the
Yeah.
whole. You see what I
Mhm.
mean?
Mhm.
So these things mattered, and the way I see it is during Vatican II, they redefined the nature of their organization. That's what I believe happened. Now, there's other theories. You could say, well, there's these heretics who became popes and somehow nobody cared. I believe that doctrinally that's not possible, but I don't blame somebody for coming up with that. Someday the church will have when there's a better day and a real voice of Peter heard in the church. And that gets to another aspect of the title of this book, and that is that if the voice of Peter were there, we could probably, crop out, the opinions people have come up with trying to explain this whole situation to themselves and maybe each other. And basically, some of them I don't even call theories, but are more like hypotheses or maybe even just scenarios. But they're all worth looking at just so that we can weigh them against the truth that I bring out in volume one. Now, volume two, I I have a theory. It's a carefully thought out theory. It's a pretty well supported one in terms of the documentation, and most importantly, in terms of how well it fits with the established doctrines of the church. And that is something that to me means something. I apply a very difficult and objective test. And that's what volume two is. What is the theory? How do we know that this really is, or at least should be, probably what's really been going on all this time? And then the latter part of this, I go over the various other ideas that people have come up with and test those against the doctrines that I verified in volume one. So that in a nutshell is what's going on in these two books. They say sede vacante because that means the chair is vacant. So the voice of Peter really isn't heard. Now, I believe that's because the guy in Vatican City that some people think of as Pope isn't really a Pope, unless in the broad sense that you could use any word to give anybody any title they want. Call him Pope or First Citizen or President or Grand Poobah with equal relevancy or irrelevancy.
Why do
But
you say
one
that? Why
of
do you feel that way?
well, because he isn't the Pope. Now we see that in two ways. First of all, we observe that the man's heretical, okay? And we also know that if we know enough of the church's doctrines, we know exactly what and where he's contradicted things and so forth. So we make that observation, coupled with the fact that the Catholic doctrine tells us that a pope is infallible under specific conditions. But even when those specific conditions are there, these guys have still done stuff they should not have been able to do and would not have been able to do had they been real popes. And the other part is, and this is where I believe it really started or got released. There may have been bad ideas and intents, but they were limited and controlled by the power of the Holy Ghost over the church. Well, what the second thing they did was by redefining their society as not the church itself, but merely some society within some unspecified portions of which various portions of that which is the church might happen to subsist within. Well, not necessarily throughout. In fact, definitely not throughout, as we see. And furthermore, not even fully contained. Now, the part that's where they're not fully contained means this. A pope, by definition, has authority over the whole church. He cannot bind the church to any dogmatic
Right.
statements
Right.
unless he teaches the whole thing. That's what sets him apart from every other bishop. They can bind their particular flock, diocese, or religious order or whatever, but they can't bind the whole church because they're responsible for this or that part of it. But the Pope is responsible for the whole thing. Well, now suddenly you've got a definition that says, well, some of the church isn't under our umbrella. We have no juridical authority over there, but they're still part of the church. That's what it said. And once you do that, you can't speak to the whole church, can you? Not
No.
authoritatively.
No.
I mean, it's never been the case the Pope in Rome can tell the Presbyterians what they're supposed to believe and expect them to do it. They can't. So once you're incapable of that, how are you even a pope at all if you don't have a pope's unique quality? So that's the other characteristic. And that's the one I really hammer on in mine because I show where these things took place in Vatican II and how they took place and how we know what the words really meant and how they were came up with. And so I dig into all of that in my part too. So
I am glad that you brought that up. Where do you begin to do the research for this? This is a tremendous, how many hours and what did that look like? What was the process?
okay, well, this actually still happened back when I was still gathering my materials for my resurrection book. What happened was I'm trying to understand the situation. See, even among real Catholics, traditional Catholics, there are a number of questions that our situation has prompted and ideas that people come up with. As I said, some of them are kind of imperfect and maybe some very imperfect. But at the same time, I can't blame anyone for coming up with these ideas because they want to have some way to make some sense of what they've been seeing around them. But these ideas, have put people into somewhat, to some degree, in different camps. And I kind of illustrate it as like, but we're all Catholics in the sense that every defined dogma and doctrine and teaching of the church, we one and all hold to and believe and subscribe to. And if we don't know it, we know where to get it and we'll rely it, at least implicitly. But if you don't have all of that, let's see, where was I? So if you don't have all the trying to hold to all of that,
Yeah.
even doing that, you could still be questions. Well, I think that the Pope is just kind of all surrounded by these handlers, and he can't really do anything that he'd like to do, And another person can say, well, maybe if we just cut a deal with them, we'll be okay. Well, that's another community. Or there's the other conclusion, which is what I believe. The reason there's no Petrine authority is because there's no Peter alive today. Because whatever the guy is, he's not being a successor of Peter. Clearly, he has not so functioned. None of these guys, certainly from Paul VI onward, with a lot of suspicion hovering over John the 23rd as well. So they haven't functioned as popes. It's not meaningful to call them that, certainly not in the sense that a Catholic Church speaks of someone as being pope. The actual canonical details, again, I can't require everybody to understand or take that position. I take it myself. I have my reasons. I've explained them. But at the same time, I realize that many sincere Catholics, they not only have a soul to save, but a family to feed and,
Right.
can't drill into all this stuff. I mean, it took 7 years of drilling before I finally sat down to pen a word of this book.
Wow. Wow.
So during that,
You must really love history too, because you've beautifully
I
tied it
do.
all in.
Yeah, it's one of my
Yeah.
things I love to read about and so forth. But that's so there's
Yeah.
a lot of Catholic history before that's been very,
Yeah.
very interesting and a lot of interesting struggles the church has been through. And it's so fascinating how all these different things. There were hard times of persecution, then soft times when suddenly, the Roman government decided to give power to them. And then there were times where the political governments were trying to take them off in different directions. Well, we'll treat you nicely, but you need to do this for us. And next, it's very, compromising positions at times. And all the different stuff that the church has had to put up with it. They've gone all around the world. They've met up with every culture and society and whatever other religions people already had. And they've had to deal with every one of those things. And through all of it, it's retained its same identity. I love the slogan of Cardinal Ottaviani. I love the slogan. I just learned a few days ago. I came across it. He actually had it on his Episcopal seal or something. And it says, Semper Idem, ever the same.
Ever the
So
same. That's
through
beautiful.
all of those, vicissitudes of human history, the church has managed to stay in one place. And that's
Ever
because
the
it
same.
stands on the rock of St. Peter. And even when you don't have a living St. Peter, The church has had over 1900 years to tell us exactly a great deal that
Yeah.
we have signed up to by being Catholics. But now, like I said, these questions have arisen. Start getting some different camps of different people kind of pulling different ways. No, I'm right. No, I'm right. You're wrong. Well, come on, we're guessing. They are. But here's the thing. I kind of illustrate it like this. We all know what the Statue of Liberty is, who made it, when it was made, why it was made, what it's meant to symbolize, and no doubt what it was meant to many immigrants on Ellis Island,
Right.
being processed to become immigrants of this country and so forth. It symbolized liberty, the freedoms of the American freedoms. We know what it means. But one day, a magician by the name of David Copperfield had gathered an audience, maybe on Ellis Island or nearby, I'm not sure the exact island, and he opened this. You could see it right in the background there. Then he pulled up the curtain, did some other things for a little while, and the curtain came down, and it was gone. I mean, you probably even see some stars through it. A single tiny little helicopter, like a highway patrol helicopter, flying in the distance, and I've seen the footage. So, and
Yeah.
it looked, where did it go? Then he pulls up the curtain again, does a little bit of minor, small tricks, and the curtain goes back up, and it's right back like it never left.
Yeah.
What did he do with it? Well, he could say, well, maybe this giant helicopter came and took it away. I calculated if you took those biggest helicopters we had, which would be those Chinook copters with two, rotors at each end, it would take 19 of those just to handle the weight of the thing. There's an even bigger helicopter Russia has that's so much bigger, it would only take 9 of them. We didn't have all those helicopters.
Right.
If they were
Yeah.
out there, you'd hear their rotors going. Well, actually, there's a compartment. They lowered it down into the base, like in
Uh-huh.
subterranean terrain, and the door closed over it. And that's where they hid it. Then when they took it back up, it lifted back out. They closed the door underneath, so it all looks normal again. Well, can you imagine what would be involved in preparing such a
Yeah.
subterranean
Yeah.
chamber
Yeah.
and making sure it doesn't get flooded with water? We are on an island after all.
Right.
So and somebody else said, well, no, all they did is put up a big black curtain with a bunch of little holes in it, to look like stars. So we could think that we were seeing the stars through it, but that was just something else. And then they just took that away. I mean, you can come up with all these ways. And by the way, the secret is out. I'm not going to give it away because you're not supposed to do that, although it can be found. I'll just say that much. And it's not any of those things. But at any rate, you can see people going into camps of, well, it's the helicopter. No, it's a subterranean chamber. No, it's the black thing, or maybe some other ideas people might have. You see what I mean? We're
Yeah.
arguing over that thing, and we might even get a little carried away. Paul and Barnabas fought in the Bible. Augustine and Jerome, Saint Chrysostom and Epiphanius even had some personality dispute. That does happen among saints. Sorry, grace of God may
Sure.
work a long way, but we're still
Iron
human.
sharpens iron, I guess, right? Griff,
Best way to
we've
view
got to
that.
start landing this plane, but first of all, I want to say how much I appreciate the examples that you've given. You have given such amazing, tangible examples that really bring your points home. So thank you for that. Thank you for your clear speaking in that way. But as we begin to wrap up this interview, what is it that you want someone to take away? What do you hope to change their thinking, to have them act on something? What do you want?
What we should do is pursue the traditional Catholic Church. It's kind of small. You'll have to look for it. But I believe I even have in the book, how to find it, how to know what it looks like. And then as you find out and connect up with the traditional Catholic community, you see, you will learn and grow in that. It's simply, I want people to join the church. And that's really the main thing. If you can, find that church. You take the trouble to get dressed up nice and drive off to some place for church. Wouldn't it be nice if you could go somewhere that God set up rather than something that mankind has set up? Just some random bunch of Christians pulled together and have a little club here. Well, Jesus already founded something much more than that. And I want to call people to that.
It's the most important message we can possibly share with anyone. So thank you so much. Griff, let me see your books again. If you don't mind holding them up, I'd love to see
Okay.
the copies one more time.
All
And
right. This
please
one was
share
the resurrection.
how and where they're available.
The easiest way to find those would be on Amazon. There is a publicity site for me while I'm pushing my books here, and I don't know how long it'll be out there. It's called Mr. Ubi Petrus, MRUBIPETRUS.com. And I think they can be ordered through that as well. And then here'd be the first Seti Vacante volume. Oops, which way? There it
Yeah,
is.
very
Okay.
good.
So that's the one that says part one, dogmatic ecclesiology applied to our times. And then part two looks almost the same. It's two lines here. That's kind of only hint that it is the second volume. And that one
Right.
says the Lumen Gentium theory about our present ecclesial circumstance. Because that is a document of Vatican II, where I believe the key channel, presto changeo, took place. And
That's
why?
wonderful, Griff. I feel like we've just scratched the surface, but I want to thank you so
I
much.
want a little extra time here.
Yes, thank you so much for um, I have to say the first thing is the passion that you have for this because it is the most important message we can possibly share. Our eternal life has already started here, and
Yeah,
we want to make sure that people are connected with Jesus to the fullest extent, not watered
the way
down.
he intended.
Yes, yes. Well, bless you. Thank you so much for your time. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Maybe we can talk again. Purchase these books, go on, give them ratings, and let Griff know that you appreciate how much he's poured into this. His heart and his soul, you can see it.
Yeah, thanks for having me on.
Thank you again, Griff. Have a great day.
You
Thanks.
too.